We're back in the wasteland, and this time we'll need to survive a society of children, the dreaded Master Blaster, and the deadly wardrobe of Tina Turner. Rev your engines once again as we discuss Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. Welcome everyone to the Atomic Cinema Experiment. I am Peter, and joining me as always is David.
I come in peace.
This is a science fiction movie podcast. We talk about a sci-fi movie. It's that simple. There's really not much more to it. We have been working through the Mad Max franchise sort of gradually over the first few months of the year because there's a new one coming out. Furiosa's coming early summer. So we're here today to talk about Mad Max 3 Beyond Thunderdome, which was the only one of the franchise that I hadn't seen before. So
okay.
Very curious to get into this one. Whereas for you hadn't seen any of them.
Nope, I am a Mad Max virgin. Never seen any of them.
Now that you've seen 3 out of 4, or technically 5, including the new one, is that like your first time? It's like you're halfway through losing the virginity?
No, you lose your virginity after the first Mad Max. Now I'm just slowly moving into like kinkier stuff. Now I'm like looking at the leather-bound men in the desert. I'm like, all right, I get it.
Okay.
I see what's going on.
All right. So we'll start spoiler-free, of course, as we always do. We'll talk about this Tina Turner edition of Mad Max. I'll just say, before we get started, I'll remind you, if you are enjoying the show, do please hit the like button. It helps out a bunch if you do. More people will find us. And if you want to support us above and beyond, you can go over to patreon.com/MailFuzzTV, and me and David do a couple of bonus monthly shows that you might enjoy. There's bonuses for other things. I'll tell you more about all that at the end of the show. But for now, we'll get into just our general feelings on Mad Max 3, which is a little different from the first two. It's got a bigger budget. It's a little bit more Hollywood. We'll talk about what that means as we give our thoughts.
Yeah.
It's obviously got Tina Turner, as I alluded to, which is the one thing I knew about this movie. I knew about the Thunderdome, and I knew about Tina Turner, and that was really it. I didn't think I knew anything else, but there was one thing that showed up that I went, you know what, I've heard of this, and I just didn't realize it was from this, or maybe I did know that and forgot, but we'll get into all that.
See, for me, I didn't know about Tina Turner until maybe, like 2 hours before I watched it. And that's simply because I was looking for it and Tina Turner's just there on the poster. But what I knew well before going into this was that it was the one with the kids. And that's, I don't know what that meant. I just knew that there were kids.
I did not know that. So,
okay.
And so when that comes into the movie about halfway through, it was like, oh, this is a turn. Okay. This one's a little bit more stationary in a way than the last one. Well, I mean, the last one had like a main sort of base, I suppose, that they were sort of revolving around. But this one, it's got a big sort of town that's been set up called Bartertown, in which Tina Turner's character kind of rules over. And there's the Thunderdome, the titular Thunderdome, and all that. So basically, Max enters the town at the start of the movie because he's looking for something that was taken from him. And then the plot unfolds from there. I won't get into any more of it yet. We'll save all that for spoilers.
Yeah.
But, yeah. So, David, what did you think of Mad Max 3 Beyond Thunderdome?
I don't mean this in as negative as it's going to sound.
Okay.
But I get why this was the last Mad Max for a while. If that makes sense. Because the first two, like the first one felt like this strange thing based off of what you think of Mad Max. The second one felt very much locked in. Like, this is definitively what I think of when I think of Mad Max is Road Warrior. This one, it felt like it almost got a bit too much in a totally different direction. It felt like, yes, we've got the wasteland. Yes, we've got all this like apocalyptic stuff, but it felt like it was less about the like violence of the wasteland and more about like, well, let's focus on Max and how like how he is as a character, I guess. But it does come at the loss of a lot of the cooler set pieces that I was kind of expecting across the movie. The storyline's fine. I think that it gets a little bit ADD at times, and it just kind of bounces around for the first 2 acts where I'm not sure where it's actually going at any point. Though I will say this movie does the best, because of that ADD, of the moral gray area. The previous 2 movies had a very clear, you've got Max and whoever he sided with on the good side, and then there's the bad guys. This one, it just keeps bouncing back and forth of, well, everyone has a point as to what they're doing is the right thing to do, and whether or not morally they can justify why they should continue to keep living that way. So that was at least interesting the whole way through. But yeah, no, it definitely feels like it's off the track of what I consider to be Mad Max, despite the fact that it is literally a third of it.
Yeah, he said there was no Mad Max movies for a while. To be precise, 30 years is the exact amount of time before Mad Max Fury Road came out. Because this came out in 1985. So, I mean, I was getting into this with weird expectations. I think I didn't watch it back when I saw the first 2 for the first time. I think I just never got around to this one because I'd heard it was the weak one. And going into it now, I was like, okay, I was curious. I was genuinely very excited to see what it was. You know, whether it was great, good, mediocre, bad, whatever it ended up being, or how I ended up feeling about it. I wanted to watch it to actually see what it is and cross it off the list and just know for myself, because I just kind of dodged it for so long. And what's funny about it is that the word Thunderdome has actually entered into the lexicon of meaning something kind of specific, and it still gets used. Wrestling especially happily throws that word around sometimes, and there's matches that are based on the idea of what the Thunderdome is. Like, it's very much something that is, in the same way that the Road Warrior established a lot of what the Wasteland is, there's still things from this one that are still entered into, just, again, furthered that idea. Like, Bartertown is very much almost the prototype for the hub world in any of your Fallout video games or anything like that, where you've got the Wasteland and you've got the characters who are making it work, and they've built up some kind of economy system, and there's something going on. There's sort of a civilization growing once again.
It feels like, you know, back before democracies and stuff like that, it felt like the warlord has the little town here, and everything just kind of functions because they need this town to function in order for society as a whole to work.
And it does feel like Max, when he comes to this town at the start of the movie, it feels like a much bigger place than anything we saw in the last movie. But given that he's got the long hair now, it's like, okay, clearly time has passed. It's been a little while. Things have changed, and, you know, we get into all that. But anyway, as for my thoughts on the movie, like, I kind of was really into big chunks of it, but there was other chunks where I was less enthusiastic about it. I think it caught me off guard right away, because as soon as the movie starts, right, you get the Warner Brothers logo, and then the opening titles play out, and it's just plain white text on a black background, so it feels quite low-key for what it is. But
meanwhile, Tina Turner's just wailing in the background.
Well, that was the thing, is the song really stuck out, is feeling very different tonally to anything in the first 2 movies. And the music kind of kept that going through. Even when it wasn't a song that was being, you know, like a Tina Turner song, like, there was saxophone in the soundtrack. There was all sorts of things popping up in the score that felt a lot more adventure-y in a way that Mad Max 1 and 2 didn't have. And I think that feeling of it being a bit Hollywood, because there's nothing wrong with that, like with a movie like a Star Wars or Indiana Jones, but it definitely felt like this one was aiming at that audience, where they wanted to take Mad Max and sort of aim it a little bit lower in the ages so that it could appeal to families and kids could enjoy it and all that stuff. And I think, you know, because the last movie, like, it clearly showed people being raped and things like that. You know, it was a much darker story, a much darker world it was inhabited. Whereas this, there's a sense of a lighthearted tone a lot of the time. There's hijinks at points. The score's kind of playful. And I'm not saying, I don't really necessarily like that change, but you can definitely feel that change from the previous one. Where it was working for me, though, is I actually think the first half hour or so is really solid. I like the introduction to the barter world, or the barter town, I should say, and the Thunderdome, and like the plot setup. We'll get into what this means later, but Master Blaster I actually think is a really fun thing. And I think the last like half hour, which is like, because this is the thing, all movie I was like, is there seriously going to be no vehicles in this? Because that's Mad Max, baby, and there's been not a single vehicle Okay, there's a brief one at the opening couple of shots, but there's been no scenes with Max in a vehicle, right?
There's no set pieces with it.
There's been no races, there's been no chases, nothing. But they just save it all for the third act, right? Because you eventually get to the point where, okay, they're getting into vehicles, and you're like, okay, we've been waiting for this. This is what Mad Max kind of is, and this is bread and butter. Not to say that having the town in the wasteland where they're bartering and they've got their own new kind of savage form of like laws and justice and all that shit, that still feels very post-apocalyptic. It still feels like it belongs. But when you think of the heart of what Mad Max and what makes a Mad Max movie is the vehicles, it's the getting into the vehicle combat, and all of them have had some level of that throughout.
That's I agree with you in that I was super into the first like half hour because it felt to me like, okay, this is just an expansion on the Mad Max world. He comes across this town that is a collection of people from all over, but they have to abide by these rules that are laid down by Tina Turner. And
she's simply the best, David.
She is.
Better than all the rest, you might say.
I do disagree with the back half because while it is a decent enough set piece for the movie that it, like, as it was presented, it pales in comparison to every other set piece that like any Mad Max movie has shown beforehand. It feels like there wasn't enough focus given to what, like I said, what I consider to be Mad Max. It felt like it was all kind of spent in delivering this story of, I mean, I don't want to spoil it too much, but Max basically exploring who he is as a character, because that's something we said during Road Warrior. He barely gets any sort of like lines. He barely talks at all. Meanwhile, in this movie, he never shuts up. He continuously talks the entire way through. So I think that by the end of the movie, it didn't quite capture me as well as the other ones.
I think that's only in comparison to the last movie. I'd still say compared to a normal protagonist, he still he still spends a lot of time being quiet. I think you're overselling that a little bit, but
I have to oversell it a little bit just to counteract the the positive a bit. I mean, what is this if not just a little bit of over the top throughout?
Oh no, it is, because even when I was enjoying the first half hour or so, I could still notice like that more like traditional Hollywood score creeping in, and that's just the little flourishes that were making it feel more like a Hollywood movie and less whatever it was before, right? It's indie, like we can do it kind of thing that they had going with the first two, but. And I do have some problems with the story. I do think the kids, I like some aspects to the kids, and I like the logic of why they exist and what it means for the world as a whole. The truth is that, the kids as a group do feel a little bit like, okay, are we in like some sort of weird Peter Pan movie? All of a sudden, there's a little bit of that vibe going. And I do think there's a few things that it doesn't set up, or the transition story-wise going into the third act feels a little bit rushed and sloppy. Almost, it feels like to me there was some stuff that was cut out for time to get it under 2 hours.
Right.
That felt like things weren't connecting up neatly. For example, one big element of the set piece in that third act, which I really like because it separates it from the first two movies because it introduces something very different. I also didn't feel that they set it up properly, where I'm like, oh, this is a thing? I thought you could have probably set this up earlier in the movie, or if you did...
I think I know what you're talking about, yeah.
All of a sudden I'm like, was there always a train track here? Because I don't feel like I noticed that, but, It feels
like the sort of things in the post-apocalypse would have been scrapped very first. It's like, oh, look, a free source of iron that goes on forever. Let's go ahead and just take that up. Quick question.
Yeah.
Over on your side of the world, what was this rated? Was it rated in the same ratings category as the first two movies?
I'm just going to have to check that because I don't know off the top of my head.
Because I'll say on our side, the first two movies were rated R. This one was actually given a PG-13. So that makes sense. Under the barrel.
Yeah, that makes sense because it does feel toned down. This is a 15 in the UK. Now, notably, in the 80s, the UK BBFC's certificate board were very harsh. And a lot of PG-13s would be 15s. These days, most PG-13s are just a 12, and there's not even a And most R-rated movies are a 15. It takes a lot of sex in the day to get the 18 these days.
Right, but I think back to over on Collector's Cut when we did Expendables, we specifically commented the third one, it was a PG-13, and you could feel the tone shift. I feel like that same sort of tone shift was here. Where the first two movies, they knew they were going to get the R, so they didn't bother trying to tone things down, and they made it pretty gory, all things considered. Whereas this one, it does feel more like someone watched Return of the Jedi come out and they're like, Christ, man, we can make a bunch more money if we just spread out the audience a little bit. Let's put some Ewoks in there.
Yeah, no, I definitely felt that. Even at the start, even before you get to the kids, even before you get to the stuff that feels a bit more hijinks, the tone is already a little bit lighter. It already feels like we're in a more movie-safe version. The original Mad Max 2, I was just double checking what rating that had in the UK. It had an X. I don't actually know what that means. That's not used anymore, so I don't know.
X, at least over here, means like no one's going to see this unless you're over 18, period.
Yeah, this is like, I think Mad Max 2 came out before the current system was put in place, so I don't even know what that means in the old system.
Hold on, you said BBFC, right? Children under 16 could not see the film, and it was changed to an 18 certificate in 1982.
Okay, so I guess technically then the second one was... when this came out, the second one was considered an 18, so it did go down a slot. Yeah. So an X was a 16. Oh, God. Yeah, that's an old system. I don't even know what any of those ratings mean.
Yeah. I mean, nowadays, anytime you hear X, it's just safe to assume, like, no kid is going to be able to see this, period. Which, then you change it over to the 12s or the 15s, and it is a bit more generous with letting younger audiences in.
Yeah, but I don't know what the attitude was in the UK when this was the system. Yeah. I don't know if like an X had a stigma to it, or if it was just, no, that's just the adult one. So you just... That's
fair. You know? I mean, it was the 70s. Nobody cared about what their kids watched in the 70s.
Yeah, no, I think... I don't necessarily mind it being a more, like, for everyone tone, necessarily. Although, I also wouldn't have minded it still being quite as harsh as the first two.
Right.
I think, for me, it's when it gets to the kids where it does almost feel like Return of the Jedi when you get to the Ewoks. There's kind of a little bit of that vibe to it. And I think that is more of a problem to me. But I think even before you get to that point, it does feel like we're in a PG-13 versus an R rating. But I still think it's a fun PG-13, and I still think the set design and the action, the actual Thunderdome fight scene, which we'll get to in spoilers, I think is actually really good. So...
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that there's a lot of thought that's put into this world, but I guess my other issue with it is that I like the Thunderdome. I like the Bartertown stuff. And I also, in a different way, like the kid stuff. But it feels like they were two totally separate plots that were just kind of forced together into the third act. It didn't feel like naturally they had any reason to combine into this movie.
That is exactly what I was getting at when I was talking about it feeling like there was missing pieces, because it doesn't feel like they do actually come together in a way that makes much sense in the third act. It feels I've got some comments on that. I can't talk about till spoilers though, so let's not talk about that anymore.
Fine. I mean, the only thing I want to say is that because I knew there were going to be kids, I was watching this first part of the movie with Tina Turner and all that, and I kept expecting there to be the part where Tina Turner says, like, oh, hey, there's these kids that, like, we lost or that were kidnapped or something like that. Something that would get the two plots running together. But that just never happened. It's just a completely separate plot that starts up after the Bartertown stuff, and they only bring it back towards the end. So... that's where it felt such a difference to me, is because I kept expecting there to be a link, and there literally never was.
Well, for me, not knowing the kids were even there, they're included when they show up. It felt like I think that came out of nowhere to me, and it took a while to sort of adjust to it, because I was like, "What is this now? We've completely changed direction here after the opening act," and that felt a little bit weird to me. So
yeah,
I do think there's some pacing and some structural issues in that sense, and it does feel like. I'm okay with the kids being separate to the Bartertown stuff. I just thought there'd be more build to them interacting, and I think that I've got some things in there to say which we'll get to in spoilers. As far as like all the aesthetic stuff's great, all the the music, while it's a very different tone from the previous films, I think is good. Like I think the music's enjoyable to listen to and works well for the moments in the film. We should mention here that this movie is actually co-directed. It's not just George Miller, it's George Miller and George
Ogilvie.
Ogilvie, yeah. I was thinking about how to pronounce that, but yeah, Ogilvie sounds good to me. The reason for this is Ogilvie was someone that George Miller had worked with on a miniseries or something before. He asked him to come on and help him. There's a sad story behind this, actually, is that the producer of the first two movies, his producing partner, Byron Kennedy, I think it is, died in a helicopter crash after Mad Max 2. And apparently George Miller was having a really rough time grieving and making this movie, and wanted help to get through it, and even questioned if he wanted to do a third one after, he was like, do I do one without him? It's kind of a sad story behind it. That's why the film ends with a dedication to him. So yeah, that's a bit, but it does make you question then, maybe in some ways, like, hey, like, what sequences, assuming that certain sequences are just the other guy, like, which stuff, what flourishes are maybe more attributed to him rather than George Miller. It's kind of hard to tell in the movie, because you also feel like there's some studio notes as well, where the studio, Warner Bros. Are putting this out as a wide release, they're giving it a budget, so maybe there's this sort of, and I think that's partly why there's this maybe tone shift of like, we want this to appeal in a cinema to the same people who went to see Star Wars, who went to see Indiana Jones. We want that audience to come and see this.
Right.
And, so even something like Tina Turner's character, when she steps out in her outfit with her big earrings and she's got this big personality, she feels a far cry away from, the Gimps and the various characters of Mad Max 2.
You think back to Mad Max 2 and you think, okay, let me picture the villains, and you see them there, but none of them had this, like, I don't know, persona to them, this feeling. I think the biggest thing for me is that people in this movie just felt more clean, which I guess goes back to that Hollywood aspect you were talking about before, is that it just doesn't feel as grimy and dirty as the first two films did the whole way through, to the point where one of the actors, the guy who played the gyrocopter captain from the last movie, he returns in this totally different role, but you can tell it's him, and he has, like, his teeth are all super pearly white, where I remember that being a thing last time, where his teeth were like scraggly and really dirty the whole way through. And it was that little thing very early on. You see that, and I'm like, wow, they really cleaned everything about this movie up. Like, every single thing is just that little bit nicer. But almost to the film's detriment, I guess, is that it doesn't feel as lived in,
Him playing a different character is weird, because it's a very similar character, which is an odd choice. But to be honest, I just assumed it was the same dude, but fair enough.
I mean, by the end of the movie, they establish it isn't, so...
Yeah, I mean, I guess.
It is a different guy. I mean, just in the plot, I see in the trivia here that apparently they had that role open for a while and they were having trouble casting it, and they're like, well, I mean, it's basically the same role as Bruce Spencer played before, so let's just bring him back. And so they did.
Yeah, but that's just more confusing, though, because you just think it's the same character.
Yes and no, because I think that like, bringing back old actors, bringing them into this actually does a great job. It's sort of making it feel like all of these Mad Max movies are legends. They're like an oral tradition that's being told about the wanderer in the wasteland that is Max, who goes around solving these things. Okay. And you're going to have, like, similar characters popping up, because in any sort of mythology, in any sort of religion, you've got characters that just kind of morph into each other. You got characters that become the same person over time. And so having, like, a guy who drives an airplane being the same guy over the course of it makes it feel like there is this mythology to it after many retellings.
Okay. And the movie does kind of reinforce that, because both this and 2 both have the idea of a child kind of telling the story of Max, and that's kind of something that's inserted in here. So, all right, well, I think we're probably ready to get spoilers and start talking through the movie. So, spoilers.
For anybody who wants to, I have done my homework. That's at the end.
Yes. You never explain what the homework is, though. Imagine this is someone's first episode. You just say, I've done my homework.
Yeah. I leave the mystery there, Pete. What's homework? I gotta stay tuned in the episode to find out. And then they do.
Ah, dear. All right, spoilers from this point on for Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. You have been warned. So, I don't know what you call the instrument, but I associate it with wandering the Australian outback. It's like a low
Didgeridoo.
Well, there you go. You knew it. Fair enough.
Didgeridoo. I had, when I was in 4th grade, I had a project of like, talk about a country or whatever, and mine was Australia. And everything I learned there is burned into my brain forever. And specifically the didgeridoo.
It's a fun word. I can't deny it.
Yep.
But Max has got his long hair. He's wandering through the wasteland as he does. But he's kind of gravitating towards this barter town. Although on his way, he finds some boots in the sand, and this is important.
Well, I mean, very, very first shot is we see a wandering caravan of camels, and the airplane guy swoops down and steals it. And it's not until afterwards that we realize that this caravan of camels was led by Max, and that's the whole reason he's wandering through the desert.
Of course, yeah. But he's walking through the desert and he finds these boots in the sand. He doesn't take the boots, even though he could probably use them, to be honest. Yeah. But he takes like this little, it's like a little gun-looking like piece, like a little ornament on the side of the boots, a little bit of dressing. But it happens to also be a whistle, and that ends up being the reason why I'm bringing it up is because it's used as a big plot point later on. So. He's going through the desert, he finds the town, and we're introduced to this town, and there's like a barter system, and it seems to be kind of inclusive in that, only certain people get to go in if they live there or whatever, because when Max wants to go in, they're not really willing to let him go until he shows that he's capable, until he shows that he's got skills, which, he does. Yeah, when they jump him, he just kind of pulls out his shotgun and fires at some dude's mohawk.
Yeah. So this entire system for Bartertown, it's that, I mean, I know you didn't like it, but from, oh God, why am I blanking on the name? Force Awakens, that's it. How she goes up to the guy with her like scrap metal and he says like, oh, half a portion or whatever. It's that, but it's just everything. So this guy just runs trade deals, and that's what Bartertown is that you bring him whatever you have, and then you can get traded other stuff. But when Max shows up, he's just like, hey, someone stole my stuff and they ended up here. Can I get that back? And he's like, sorry, this is trading post, bro. Get out of here. Nobody wants to help you with your thing unless you got something to trade. And it's only once he pulls out the guns and stuff that it's like, oh, you have skills. Okay, come with me.
Yeah, and then they ask him to put all of his weapons into the counter because they don't let them into the town with the weapons, which I thought was going to come back up later where he comes back to get them, but he never actually does.
Nah, it's fully a joke scene of the overstocked arsenal that is Max.
Which is funny because it was a big point in the last movie, like how hard it was to find ammo, and my first thought was, oh, he's been searching for a while. This is how we know some time has passed, is because he's found like 4 guns, he's got like a handful of shotgun shells, he's got a ton of stuff with him.
Still has his crossbow.
Yeah, so he gets into the town, and we get to see, we get the big entrance where they're leading them through to this elevator that takes, there's like a sort of platform with a tent over it, which is where Tina Turner lives, above everyone else. But we get this whole walk and talk, not even a talk, just a walk through the town. We get to see that it's bustling with activity, people getting haircuts, people, getting, whatever, like the little water stalls. It's
like a town square sort of thing.
Food stalls, all that kind of thing. But it's very bustling, it's very busy.
There is an introduction of a bit of lore here that I think is new. As he's walking into the town, a water salesman essentially tries to sell him. He's just like, hey, water in the desert, it's great. And then Max pulls out a Geiger counter, scans the water, and it goes nuts. And it's implied that the apocalypse this time around was caused by nuclear detonation. Like everyone fired their nukes off, which... Correct me if I'm wrong, but the last movie was solely based off of like a Cold War trying to get gas and stuff. It wasn't actually nuclear, was it?
No, I think they implied at the start of 2 that it led to bombs.
It was nukes?
Yeah, I think so. I don't think this is different. No.
Fair enough. I thought I just forgot that because I thought this was a introduction of like, this is the first time we actually get confirmation of nukes were dropped, but if not, so be it.
I think it was definitely at least implied, if not. I mean, certainly the story was that 2 sides fought, so I think given the fact that we're in a wasteland, it's just natural to assume that it ended with nukes. But this is the first time I've seen them test for radiation on something, though. That's definitely new.
True. Yeah, this is the first time radiation is a problem throughout any of Mad Max.
So, yeah, we meet Tina Turner. She has like her main henchman, who I don't even know what his name is, but he's very like the whole philosophy of designing characters that are easy to recognize at a glance, even if you never learn their name, is still true in this, because this main henchman dude, he's got like a stick on his back with like a mask and a wig, so it's always above his head. So he's got like this like face like just above his head at all times.
He's also fairly short, so the face is actually at like everyone else's eye level. So that's that. By the way, his name is Iron Bars.
Iron Bars, very good. He's a very angry little man, and they invite Max in. It seems like they're being friendly, but this is actually an audition, and they try and kill him. He fights back and is able to, save himself and put on a good show. And then Tina Turner smiles and says, "Oh, you're the first one who's passed the audition. I've got a proposition for you. You'll get your vehicle back, you'll get fuel, I'll give you food, and like a bit of everything. You'll get everything you could possibly want. It's a great deal, right?" And he's like, "Yeah, what do you want?" So it turns out she puts down her plan, which is that she explains that underneath Bartertown there is the underworld, which is where the fuel that's running any of the electricity and stuff, or even the fuel for the vehicles, is made. And what they've done here is that they use methane from pig shit, right? So they've got lots of pigs underground that are shitting, and they're processing the pig shit, and that's how they're fueling everything. And because of this, the person who was smart enough to do all this is kind of got a lot of the power and is kind of really in charge, even if they're not the one up top making the decisions like she is. There's someone that she wants to take out of the picture, so she's actually completely in charge. And this is where we're introduced to Master Blaster. So it's actually two people, a tall, muscly guy who's got like a big metal mask on, so you never really see his face until, of course, it's he's later on. But
the reveal,
and then you've got like a little person who is like sitting on his shoulders, on like a little platform behind his shoulders, directing him, and he's the brains. He's like a really smart guy. He's a scientist or engineer or something, but he's been the one who's masterminded this whole thing, and she wants him to stay alive because she kind of needs his expertise, but she wants Max to kill Blaster, the big part of the two of them, because that's the muscle, that's the one that enforces all of his will. So if he's taken out, then she can control Master.
The moment I saw these guys on camera, I was like, boss fight. Like it's just a video game boss character where you got the two different sides and they each have different strategies to take them out. Like it's just a video game boss fight.
Yeah, I love the look of these two. I think as soon as I saw them, I was like, okay, I'm into this. And this was actually the thing that I didn't realize was from this movie. I'd heard the phrase Master Blaster.
Oh, okay.
So I was like, oh, that's from this. Okay, very cool. So yeah, it sets this up. Okay, this is the goal. The rule is that he can't tell anyone that he's made a deal with her. It has to all be kind of hush-hush. It has to kill them, and it has to be in the Thunderdome. And it's like, okay, this all tracks, makes sense. Obviously, because it's a movie, I'm like, okay, Tina, you're the real villain. You're clearly going to be the real villain. So I'm not sure how we're going to pivot to that, but definitely this is going to go south, and you're going to be the actual antagonist.
See, you say that. I didn't get that vibe up front. Like, I understood the vibe of, okay, she's the one in control, so obviously at some point she's going to dick Max over, but I didn't think it was going to be that she's the quote-unquote real villain. I thought she was just going to be another villain. I thought it was just going to be a thing where everyone's against Max by the end, and he has to, like, solve his own way out.
I don't know what to tell you.
No, I'm just saying, you made it sound like it's super obvious, but maybe I'm just an idiot.
Well, no, I thought it was obvious, but sometimes I say that and people are like, it's not that obvious. I thought this was obvious. For me, it was kind of like telegraphed, like, because it's a very typical plot thing. Is like you have the hero make a deal with someone who's a little bit shades of grey, only to find out that they're the real villain, like, and that's where it goes.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that is the plot that happens. I guess it's also maybe, like I said, I was kind of expecting Tina to send Max out to get the kids at some point, but because that never happened, she ended, like, if she had that plot, it would have made her more redeemable, I guess, for me. Of it's like, oh, we need to rescue these children who've been out in the wasteland forever or whatever, but that wasn't the case. So maybe I was just expecting too much from her.
Yeah, it feels like you had a lot of expectations of what this was going to be going in, and I think it's almost bit you here because...
Yeah, a little bit.
Because, like, effectively said, well, if she had that plot, well, yeah, but like there was nothing to say that she would have that plot. This is like, you just heard there's kids and assumed that she would be tied to them somehow.
See, this is why I try to go in blind to all these things. That way I don't come in with any sort of expectations.
Yeah, so I never had those thoughts, but he wants to try and learn a weakness, though, of the big guy, of Blaster, because, you know, he's big. Like, on a straight fight, he's probably going to get his ass kicked. So he basically goes down to work in the underground. He meets a prisoner down there. Apparently the prisoners here get sentenced to working down here with collars round their necks so they can't escape. So he meets a guy down here that's doing that, and I mentioned that because he ends up kind of being an important character, all things considered, as the movie goes on.
His crime was that he killed a pig in order to feed his family. So he's a nice guy as far as the movie says it goes. He's a criminal. He broke the law, but he's a good guy.
Well, yeah, but at the end when he's escaping with everyone else, I don't recall him going for his family. So I don't know if the family thing's a true story.
I mean, entirely possibly not, but at the same point, like, he already accepted he was going to die down there. I'm sure he said goodbye to his family and all that, and he's like, well, I guess I'm just out now. Goodbye. Because if he continued to live in the town, like, what was he going to do? There's no way to be able to save that.
Yeah. So, Max wants to find a weakness, and basically, and this was a nice little bit of continuity from the previous movie, actually, is that he sees his truck, right? And the others are like, there's like a mechanic working on it, and he's telling Master Blaster, hey, there's a problem, boss. There's like dynamite under here, and it'll go off if we try and use it. And I was like, oh, that's a neat little callback, because in the second movie, that was a trick Max did with his car, right? He had an explosive set up so that no one could take it. So he steps in and says, hey, that's my vehicle. And Master Blaster's like, hey, like, disarm it now. And Max puts up a little bit of a fight and tries to resist. And when Max sort of evokes the name of Tina Turner, and obviously that's not her name in the movie, but that's what I'm going to say.
I like that so much more.
Master Blaster calls up and makes Tina Turner kind of humiliate herself and tell everyone in the town over the speaker who's really in charge. And she's like, Master Blaster's in charge of Bartertown. All right. So it does kind of set up, okay, maybe Master Blaster is a villain. Maybe this does make them unlikable. It feels like they're a bit egotistical, right? So it's sort of pivoting in that direction. So Max ultimately goes into the truck to deal with things. And it's when he's in there that this alarm goes off. And when the alarm goes off, Blaster starts holding his helmet in pain and starts like sort of, and it really is like a video game boss where you find their weakness, and like this is the one thing that really sort of debilitates them, and he starts to really feel pain. So the alarm goes off, or shuts off, I should say, and Max pulls out his little whistle to say, hey, is this also enough of a noise, that, like high pitched, that'll upset him? And sure enough, it does. So he's got this secret weapon. We've set up the Chekhov's whistle. The whistle that'll let him win the Thunderdome fight. So, yeah, this was all just fun because it was interesting, the characters. It was cool to see how this town operates and how they've got this alternative fuel source, which again further emphasizes the idea that it's been a good number of years now into the post-apocalypse, and now these like systems have sort of started to like form of how do we survive in this world, how do we function, how do we get some of the comforts of the old days. You know, and this is something that's reinforced later with the kids, because these kids all don't even know the world before the wasteland, and that's like another way it comes up later. So, right,
yeah, which I mean, it's one of those things where it never says definitively how long has passed. If you go by release dates, it's been at least 6 years, probably more, because obviously Mad Max was technically after the apocalypse, or at least in the slow decline leading up to it.
The first one, I don't know if I'd say it's after. It's kind of on the build up.
It's during the war, but not quite whenever the nuke went off, probably. But no, it does feel like, okay, we are at the point where we have to figure out alternative energy sources. We have to figure out how society is going to be able to continue. And you see, like, specifically with Tina Turner's character, it seems that they have gone back to kind of like a warlord system where there's one person who's just in charge of things, and they just have to be either the strongest or the most charismatic. And it seems like Tina Turner's taken the charismatic route, where all of her laws literally just rhyme, and that's why people are into it, because they can chant it.
Yeah,
that's the whole thing.
There's that, but there's also that idea of like she's really in them because she gives them entertainment. Like their entire justice system revolves around the Thunderdome, which then everyone in the town gets excited for and watches. They're really into it, and they treat it with this pageantry like it's a ritual. And that's something you even see with the kids later on, is that every day they tell the story of how they got the way they are. And obviously it's not completely accurate, and it's in their own kind of weird way where it's a case of it's morphed over time, because none of these kids actually went through the story of what happened. They're all just kind of like saying vaguely things they've heard, but package it in a way that makes sense to them. So this idea of like groups of people needing some kind of ritual, of needing some kind of a ritual of
entertainment or whatever.
Yeah, entertainment or religion or something for them to sort of like cling on to and give their life some kind of shape and meaning. And that seems to be what happens in both civilizations that we meet in this movie. I think that stuff's really interesting. Tina Turner's outfit, though, it's so funny to me, because I feel like I'm sure she probably used this outfit in a concert, because it looks like something, it looks like an over-the-top outfit that a singer would wear on a concert. Like, I can see Madonna or Janet Jackson wearing this.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, I don't think it actually was, but I think that probably the costuming department was, like, informed by the fact that Tina Turner would be wearing it. And they're like, okay, so we've got to find the middle ground between Wasteland and Pop Star. And they just kind of got to here.
I would argue they didn't find the middle of that. They definitely veered more in one direction than the other.
I will say, one of the weirdest things for me is the hairstyle going on. It is very much, pop star. It's very long flowing hair. But the weird part is that it's got this major widow's peak thing going on, to the point where, according to trivia, Tina Turner had to shave her head just to wear this wig. And she was fine with that. It wasn't a big deal, but it makes you think, like, what was so important about this hairstyle beyond just like Tina Turner's normal hair? That's something, or something that you can just be put on top of that.
She was into the craft of movie making. She wanted to do a big thing. I just looked her up on Wikipedia because I wanted to see like how long she was like famous at this point. She was active since the 50s, so I don't know when she had it big, but she'd been a professional singer for a long time. I also didn't know she died last year.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. That was all the comments on the thing I was watching said like, oh, watching this in honor of Tina Turner from like 6 months ago. Sorry, just looking at this here. Apparently, I don't know if it's her biggest hit or her peak or whatnot, but apparently her biggest hit was What Love Got to Do with It. And that was #1 for 3 weeks straight in May of 1984. So it was literally just before this movie came out where she had a #1 hit for 3 straight weeks.
I mean, the breakdown on our wiki page, early success is 60 to 65, and then mainstream success is 66 to 75. So it sounds like she was still like a known quantity by that point.
She may have just like hit her peak right before this movie came out.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. This was when she was with Ike Turner. This was like a duo performance, and then she went solo in 1976. And then
early career resurgence 1983. So yeah, she was literally just about to come on the come up as this movie was being produced.
She was making her comeback.
Yep.
So I was going to joke, why wasn't there a Simply the Best Easter egg or like sly reference in this, but it may be because that song didn't exist yet. I don't know when she did that one.
I mean, if there was going to be one, it would be What's Love Got to Do with It, and I could think of a few good places that could fit in there.
I don't. There's no love in this movie. What are you talking about?
That's the point. That's the point of the thing. Where like one of the kids is like, "But wait, don't you have love in your heart?" And she's like, Psh, "What's love got to do with it?"
Her name, by the way, is Anti-Entity, which I don't even think I caught the word entity at all in this movie.
Well, that's the thing. They call her Auntie, and then entity sounds so close. It may just be the Australian accent throwing you off. Oh, I love this.
Anti-Entity.
Her chart success continued with Better Be Good to Me, Private Dancer, and We Don't Need Another Hero, parentheses, Thunderdome.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's clearly her song playing over the credits at the end. I mean, well, I mean, I say that. But literally, for like, what? How long was it between Avatar and Avatar 2? Like
10, 14 years?
13 years. For 13 years, I assumed Celine Dion was singing in the end credits song in Avatar because I heard a woman singing of that style. I assumed it was her because she did Titanic and she's buddy with James Cameron. Turns out that was Leona Lewis that whole time, and I just made a weird assumption.
It was probably written for Celine Dion, though.
So, anywho, so yeah, like he has to pick the fight. That's how you get the Thunderdome going. You just like challenge someone, and so he does. He basically just stands in front of him, and because he already kind of like went against him underground, very quickly Master Blaster's like, "We want Thunderdome," and the crowd all starts gathering. They're all excited about it. And Tina Turner has like a little. It's like a little ski lift that goes from her like little platform up there that goes down to the top of the Thunderdome. Yeah. I thought that was like a really funny little visual. So,
if we're talking about Thunderdome now, I do want to bring up a few things about it.
Yes.
I always imagined it bigger. I always imagined it to be like this big, massive set piece thing.
It was smaller than I thought it was going to be as well, I have to say. I've always heard, two men will enter, only one can leave, and that's a big thing. I had no idea that at the start of this fight, they're both attached to like sort of bungee rope harnesses, and they're kind of like jumping around. But honestly, it made it really interesting because I was going in thinking, it's just going to be like a gladiator style combat thing where they're just trying to fight, and it's it may be a good fight scene if they film it well, but this made it more unique where you've got the stuntman for Max doing like sort of flips to get away from Master Blaster, and the bungee thing that he's attached to is making him jump really high. So it was like, this feels really different because there's all this mobility that comes with this.
I really do like how different it is, but I also feel like there are absolutely no rules to this whatsoever in terms of physics.
Oh, sure.
Because like they start off the match and it's shown that they're dragged back to the walls and they've got like tension in their rubber bands. So when it zooms, when they let go, they zoom towards each other. And then they kind of just dangle in the air for a while, fighting each other. But then slowly they start to be able to walk on the ground, which doesn't make any sense to me. Because if you were dangling in the air, how did you all of a sudden get the ability to be on the ground? So yeah, physics just kind of takes a day off for making it look cool. I'm all right with that, but it did every once in a while. I'd just be like, but wait, how could that work with what you've given me so far?
Yeah, but it is different, and like there's weapons at the top of the Thunderdome that if they sort of bounce up to, they can grab a weapon, and there's like a sledgehammer, a chainsaw, a big spear, things like that. This is something that certainly the smaller wrestling companies have really ripped off over the years, where they're like, it's a cage match, but there's weapons at the top of the cage. You can, if you get to the weapon, you can use it.
I especially love the fact that they, I don't want to say ripped off because that's obviously not what happened because this one came first, but all I could think of when there's a point where Max is not got a weapon yet, but Blaster does, he just keeps on jumping up to the top of the cages, and all I can think is Bonesaw versus Spider-Man, where he's up in the cage and he's like, get down here, and he's like, no, I'm gonna stay up here for a while.
Sam Raimi probably likes this movie.
Oh, most definitely.
It plays it well because you've got all the jumping around stuff, especially once Master Blaster's got a weapon and Max doesn't. But it also has this thing where Max is trying to get the whistle out, but he can't because he keeps getting grabbed, and then he drops it, and you're like, okay, so now he just has to survive for a little bit. But you, in the back of your head, you're like, okay, eventually he's going to find that whistle, and that's going to be how he wins. And sure enough, that's what he does. He's able to get to it, but there's a lot of like almost getting it, and then he has to dodge at the last second or something. So they really play with the suspense of him getting to his secret weapon. And then once he does, it does just work like a charm. Blaster starts to hold his head. He's in pain, and Max swings his big hammer at his head repeatedly until the helmet comes flying off. And this is where it takes an interesting turn, because I really like the end of this, where Max is standing over him. He's won. All he has to do is give him the killing blow. But he looks at Blaster's face, and he looks kind of innocent in a weird way. Like, he doesn't look like some big scary dude. He looks like confused or whatever.
Well, they make it very clear he has some sort of intellectual disability.
Well, I mean, it's made clear because Master jumps up and says, "Hey, he's he mentally he's quite young. Like, this isn't fair. And Max, being the hero of the story, turns around, looks at Tina Turner and says, this wasn't part of the deal, which of course immediately master clocks that word and is like, wait, deal? What deal? What's this? There was a deal in place? So Tina just has her men shoot some arrows at him while he's down, kills a blaster, and Max tries to leave, but it's like, no, you're getting arrested because you told him it was a deal.
Yeah, it was not even he's getting arrested. Basically, the guard at the door is saying, like, no, I've been instructed, like, you didn't kill him, you don't get to leave, you didn't fulfill your end of the deal. And then the pig killer guy actually starts a chant saying 2 men enter, 1 man leave, kind of forcing Tina into a door saying, like, he obeyed the law, 1 man is dead, he should be allowed to leave now.
Basically what it's doing is the crowd chanting, 1 man leaves, it's almost like that's, from Gladiator, where the Emperor, Joaquin Phoenix, is a shithead. He wants to kill Russell Crowe, but the crowd love him too much, so he has to sort of, like, begrudgingly let him live and give him the thumbs up.
But even Tina doesn't want to go that far.
But that's what I'm saying, is effectively this is trying to put her in that position, but she's smart enough to go, but there's another law, and here's the other law, which says that because he did this thing, he gets this punishment, and then we see what that punishment is in the next scene.
The law is, if you break a deal, you face the wheel.
Yes, and there's a spinny wheel which picks the punishment, and we get to that in a second. But yeah, effectively though, like, she was going to arrest him and give him the wheel or whatever. Probably would have just been the same thing. But
I mean, she probably would have killed him if it wasn't for the fact that everyone there was around and being able to see it.
Yeah, possibly. But she does this. We get the punishment. I can't even remember how it was phrased on the wheel. But
hold on, I had the list of the trivia of, like, all the things on the wheel, but the thing that he specifically rolled on was gulag.
Right, okay.
Which essentially is just send you out in the desert with no chance of survival. That's basically all it comes down to.
But not without putting a funny head on him so that he looks silly. They set him backwards on a horse, and they slap the back of the horse, and he's tied up as well. His hands are tied, and he just gets ridden out into the desert as far as the horse can go, until the horse just outright collapses because it can't go any further.
I do, in terms of the mask that's on him, there's also a few things later on in this movie, specifically with the kids. I think they do a really good job of something that shows up in a lot of apocalyptic media nowadays, which is, like, advertising and, like, propaganda, not propaganda, but, like, media stuff, like characters and, like, McDonald's arches and stuff like that. That's the kind of stuff that shows up here in this wasteland, but they don't talk about it. They don't think about it in terms of what it was, only what it can serve them now. So, like, when they put this guy's head on top of it, it feels like it was like a mascot costume or something.
Oh, for sure. But,
yeah, but nowadays it's just, we're using this as a torture device. Goodbye. But it's just one of those things that's left over post-apocalypse. And I like that because I don't think that was in the previous two that much.
I think what's interesting to me about this is that, do they always put a silly head when they do this punishment? And if so, how many silly heads do they have sitting around to facilitate this punishment?
I mean, I think they probably do. And I think that it's one of those things where it's probably just what's traded in. Like, someone from the wasteland be like, hey, I found this McDonald's costume. Do you want it? And it's like, yeah, sure. You can have a quarter tank of gas for that. Go nuts.
Maybe they have to settle for a funny hat if they don't get, like, a good head. Because this is really specific. Getting a full head costume is, that's not that common.
It doesn't even make sense as to why it's there. He's tied up. It's not like he can do anything about it. Just putting that on him is an extra humiliation.
Yeah. I think this is a really important point in the movie, though, because this is very much just the transition to the next part of the movie. And I think at this point in the story, I was thinking, okay, they've done this to him, they've sent him out into the desert, and I think the big problem with the next chunk of the movie for me, which isn't even anything to do with the kids themselves, is the fact that I kept like, okay, we're obviously going to go back there. There's no way we're not going back to Tina Turner and having an ending that involves that town. It's just not possible. And I kept waiting for what Mad Max's motivation was to want to go back. And my assumption as he was, like, riding out into the desert is that he still wants his stuff back, and maybe now he wants revenge. Maybe now he wants to fight back because of what they've done to him or something. And that never becomes the case. In fact, he's left for dead. He's only saved, well, one, because the prisoner guy who kind of talked to him a little bit sends out his pet monkey with a canteen of water for him to drink. So
real quick, I think the implication is that this was Max's pet monkey. Am I wrong there? Because the monkey was in the back of the caravan during the opening scene.
Oh, was it? I don't remember. Fair enough.
It was. So when did Max get a pet monkey?
There's a lot of time between 2 and 3.
I guess, but a monkey's not... It doesn't feel like one of those things you just come across. It's not one of those things where it's like, oh, I killed a guy, he had a monkey, and I just adopted it as my pet. But I guess the dog got boring.
Yeah, he had a dog in the last one. He's got a monkey in this one. What do you want?
All right. When I watch Fury Road, is he going to have like a tiger? Is that what we just going with more and more exotic pets?
So the monkey gets the water to him, and then out of nowhere, someone finds him, right? He's basically dying in the desert. And someone finds him, a young woman, and she starts dragging him somewhere. And I was like, okay, this is a new character we're introducing, and, we'll see where it goes. And she takes him back to effectively another community, which is made up entirely of kids. Her and like one other guy, like the 2 oldest ones, but they're still kids. They're still like teenagers.
Yeah, and then they're like on the verge of 18.
Yeah, and then everyone else is younger than that, and it's all kids. And as Max wakes up, they call him Captain Walker, and they think he's this Captain Walker guy. Max wakes up. They've cut his hair. He's very confused, of course. But they all start kind of calling him this name. They all start kind of worshipping him. And they don't understand why he's not responding to what they're expecting to. So they think it's a test. And then the girl, what was her name here? Savannah. She is given the task of telling the story. And there's some interesting elements to this that I actually quite like, which is...
Yeah.
So the idea being that you've got this community of kids, none of whom remember the world from before, right? They grew up post-apocalypse, and they talk a little bit funny because they're saying words that we understand, but they're saying it in ways that are a little bit off kilter. Like,
yeah,
what's so funny?
You say that, but as they first started talking, I'm like, is this just Australian slang? Is that all I'm hearing here? Is just this is slang for Australia? I know it's not, but because as it progresses, it obviously gets more and more. But like, there's a certain point at the beginning where I was like, is this just them talking? Is this just how the kids talk in the 80s in Australia? Is that it?
Such an American attitude.
Yeah. Look,
is this just a weird foreign thing?
The 80s were a weird time for slang, and Australia already has some strange terms, so I thought maybe this was just the collision of the two.
These kids were not dropping anywhere near enough C-bombs for this to be authentic Australian slang from the 80s, okay?
That's fair. That's fair.
That's the thing that I'll point out. So she, they're saying things like, we every day we have the telling. We have to pass on the knowing so that the birthdays of tomorrow will know. And I may be phrasing it slightly different than they did, but that was the kind of way they spoke.
Yeah, the gist of it.
You could understand what they were saying, but they were saying it in this strange way, and you could tell that they thought that there was this plane that a captain was going to show up, and they think Max is this captain who will lead them to the promised land, effectively, some magic place that's still perfect, that's still functioning.
Yeah, their previous thing they have written on the walls is essentially the history, the oral tradition that's been passed down to them. And they retell the story seemingly every night in order to remind themselves of what happened and also continue it for the next generations. But I really, really, really like this sequence because it's so clear to somebody outside of it what happened. There was a nuclear bomb, and there was a captain or something that got a bunch of people on a plane and tried to escape it. It ended up crashing, and they set up in this general area. And then it turns out that basically all the adults kind of went out to form a rescue party, and they left the kids behind. And then they just never made it back. No one ever came back for the kids. And that's why they keep on waiting.
You'd assume that the 2 older kids were maybe like yeah, they were maybe 7 or something like that when this happened, you know?
Right.
And that's why they have been able to tell this story to the younger kids. But because they were so young when they experienced whatever they remember, it's this weird kind of, you know, morphed version of it where it's told in this way.
Yeah. And there's a bunch of remaining stuff as well that I really like, where they don't know what it does. It's essentially just like a foreign concept.
This is what I was going to get to, is that they've got the little photo thing, right? Where you put your eyes in the goggles and you look at the photos. And this is actually before my time, so I don't even know what it's called. But they put the photos in and they're showing it to Max and they're saying, have you ever seen this before? And it's a photo of a city, right? It's a city with all the lights on and a photo of a highway and stuff like that. And one of my favorite things about this scene is that Max just casually says, oh, that's a city. They're called cities. There used to be a ton of them. And the kids are like, cities. It's like they'd never heard this word before. They'd never had a word to call what a city was. They just sort of referred to it in other ways.
The same thing with like the term skyscraper. They called it something else. And he said like, oh yeah, there was skyscrapers everywhere. It's like, skyscrapers. That's it. That's the word. That's the thing. God, that makes so much sense. But no, what I really do like about the segment though is that all of the kids have like stuff that was on the plane. So for instance, one of them has like a staff that has a record on it. Yeah. And they get the concept that the record needs to spin and then sound will come out. But they just can't piece it together. So like as they're waiting on Max to come back from his like coma, basically, they're spinning the record on this staff and then someone's just repeating like Delta Fox like Niner or something like that, because
they've got the captain's like headset from the cockpit. He's wearing that and he's sort of like talking into hoping that someone will talk back. And
yeah, because they know that's how it should work in the vague sense, but they just don't know the specifics. And I love this whole sequence because it feels really thought out about what kind of things would survive that oral tradition and what kind of things wouldn't. For instance, when they show the nuclear bomb painting on the wall, they call it the pox eclipse, which both of those independently, negative words, a pox and an eclipse, bad things. So it like feels like it makes sense that they would mishear the word apocalypse and replace it with 2 other words that are equally as negative. I don't know. I just really liked this whole segment the whole way through because it feels like it's simultaneously lore for the Mad Max world as a whole, while also being just really interesting world building for these kids individually.
I like it from that side of things. I like it from that perspective. In the movie, though, where it's slotted, it feels like we've just turned into a different movie after that opening like chunk. And I think here I was like, okay, but like, okay, where are we going from here, though? What exactly are we doing with this? Right. And I think my frustrations built a little bit when it became very clear that Max had no intention of going back to the town, and he's like, no, we should stay here, to the point where the end of this segment is effectively once he's proven to them that he's not this captain and that he's not going to fly them anywhere, because they take him to a plane, like the plane that crashed is in the desert nearby. Yeah, they take him there. It's like, here it is, fly it for us, take us to the promised land. And he's like, nope, that's not happening. He actually tries to stop some of them who want to go and find, you know, wherever he came from, because like, if you made this journey, it's going to be hard and you almost died doing it, but we can maybe make it there. So we're going to go find it. And Max is like, no, that place is terrible. They'll abuse you. You've got a good thing going here. There's a water source. You've got stuff. Like, you know, set up camp here. Stay here. This is going well. And to the point where he actually grabs, it's like one of the kids has got like a spear with like a thing on it and all that. He grabs it, pulls some of it off, because he's obviously noticed this, that it's actually a gun they've used as the pole for the spear. Yeah. And he like grabs like some bullets they've got dangling as decoration. And I like that they're just sort of dangling there because they don't know that they go in the gun. They're just different things to them. So he grabs them and he fires this gun almost as if to like show an act of God to these kids, because they'll be like, whoa, what was that? That was scary. That was a loud noise.
This is my boomstick.
Effectively. So it's like, okay, so he's actively trying to stop some of the kids from going back there. And then after they sleep, it turns out that the kids that wanted to go have left anyway. So at this point in the movie, the goal, the mission has become him going out to try and save and bring the kids back that have left to go to the town. So all this time, and by this point, it's probably like a half hour since we left the town, there's been no reason or motivation to go back there. And I do think that maybe hurts the overall momentum of the movie, because it feels that we've shifted gears so much, and now he has no interest in going back. He doesn't really seem to care about going back, that I know we're eventually going to somehow, like it's going to happen because it's a movie and we're going to get back there, but there's like no impotence from him to go back there. He kind of just ends up back there because when he does find the kids to save them, and he saves them from some quicksand, and it looks like one of the kids has died because, you know, like when he pulls her out of the quicksand, it looks like someone else was hanging on to her that's not there anymore. So it's very implied. It's well done in that sense. You get it without showing anything too graphic or, you know.
Yeah, it implies like, okay, this girl thought that she had everything figured out, and that's why she's leading this group. But then they're lost in this desert essentially, and one of their own is killed via something that like if they had stayed back, he wouldn't have died. So it gives this girl a little bit of hubris and how she overcomes that.
Yeah, but they realize, oh, we're actually closer to the town now, right? We can see the lights in the distance. So it's like, shit, the town's our only hope. Let's go. And I think my big problem getting into this last chunk of the movie is that when they're going back into the town, they're sneaking in. Max does say we're looking for Master. We're looking for the little guy, right? And they're in the vents. They're sneaking around and they're looking for him. I think my main thing here is that it's unclear how much of a plan Max has at this point. Given that he didn't even want to come back, like any plan he has formed, he's only done it in this short little distance of time of him seeing the town, saying, "Okay, we have to go there." But all of a sudden, once he's back there, it kind of feels like there's more of a plan, like there's more of a purpose that I don't think the movie's really set us up for. And if anything, it's actually the prisoner who seems to have more of like a goal that Max just kind of goes along with once he's in there. It's a little bit wishy-washy as to what he actually wants to do at this point in the movie and what his goals are.
There's like you said, they go in and they say, we got to go find the little guy, we got to find the Master. But I don't think the movie ever says why. Like, I would think the only reason they're here in the town is basically to stock up on water and enough stuff to make it back to the other tribe. But it doesn't seem like that's the goal from Max's perspective, because there's no reason that getting Master would help. So,
well, I do think, okay, I think there is a reason why he wants Master, and I think it becomes clear as the movie's going on. I think the idea is that Master's smart enough to set up a society. He's smart enough to set up systems, to create energy, to do whatever, right? He realizes that he's so useful. The fact that Tina Turner wants to keep Master because he's the brains of the operation. Because one of the things we do see, like right after the first chunk of the movie, is that he says, "I'm not going to fix anything," because if something breaks downstairs and the power goes off, and he's like, no, I'm not fixing anything. And then they actually sort of threaten him by putting him in with the pigs to scare the shit out of him and then bring him back up. And when we find him here at this part of the movie, he's living in like a pen. They've made like a little pen for him in the middle of the pigs, so that he's living a horrible life, and he's being kept around just because he knows how to make things and fix things. And so my assumption is that Max thinks he can give the kids a better life. He can go back with the kids, and wherever they are, he can use the water, maybe make a watermill or something. So, he clearly knows how to make things.
I mean, they do have a literal entire downed Boeing plane. Like, I'm sure he can come up with something out of an entire plane still being intact.
So I think it's not so much about saving him, because I think before he sees where he is, he doesn't really have a reason to want to save him, I suppose. Other than just the idea that because obviously he felt sympathy once he saw what Blaster actually was, like who he was. But
I feel like that's more sympathy towards Blaster than it was Master, because we see that Master from the beginning is just a prick to Max.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
I don't think he earns in Max's eyes the redemption, but to the audience we see that he is just being tortured essentially, and that redeems him for us.
Well, yeah, and maybe not redemption, but I do. Again, this is one of these things that just felt really obvious to me, is that the second Master is kind of crying out because his friend, or whatever you want to call Blaster to him, his other half,
adoptive son.
Yeah, the way he cries out once that happens, instantly I'm like, okay, Max is going to help him by the end of the movie, because now they have a reason to be on the same side.
I see where you're coming from, but I took it more as like in Return of the Jedi where there's the Rancor pit, and then there's that guy who once the Rancor is killed, he's like is crying over it. We don't ever come back to that character. He's not a redeemable character. He's just like the dude who's upset that his pet essentially died, you know?
Yeah, but this was a more established character than that. Like, that guy was basically an extra. This was more someone who'd been set up, and sure enough, obviously they end up kind of working together. Or at the very least, Max ends up saving him along with all the kids here at the end.
So I don't know. So very brief fast forward here. He's got like swag. He's got like a full suit and stuff that he's saved on this truck thing that we end up getting to. Where in the hell did he have all that?
I don't have a good answer for you.
The only thing I could think is that he's been in this place since the apocalypse, and that was his like stuff. That was his original thing.
Yeah, it's worth mentioning he's not a young guy either. He is older.
No, yeah, he is significantly. So maybe he did just outlast it, and this is just all of his stuff from beforehand.
Well, I mean, if someone Max's age obviously comes from before the Wasteland times, then obviously this older guy does.
Oh, yeah. Obviously he was from before it, but like it seems like he managed to maintain all of his like worldly goods through the apocalypse is what I'm saying. He had like a chest that he's just kept this entire time.
That's not hard to believe. It's just a chest of stuff.
No. Yeah, I mean, I guess it just seems like the sort of thing where in the Wasteland, that's sort of like a nice suit is the first thing you would trade off. You'd be like, look at this fabric, very nicely woven. Give me water, please.
Yeah, but he set up this whole system, so he's. I think he's been better, like, insulated from all that than maybe most people have. Yeah. But yeah, I think this transition in the movie, even though I like a lot of what happens once we get into kind of the thrust of what's going on, is basically there's a bit of a fight. Iron Bars. Iron Bars tries to fight Max in that and ends up getting kicked into the pig shit. So he's and it's really disgusting because when he sits back up, he actually has some of it in his mouth and he spits it out. And I know it's not really pig shit when they shot the movie, but it still looks nasty.
No, that sent a shiver down my spine as I saw it. I was like, ugh, gross. Don't do it.
But yeah, it turns out there's like a train down here, and like Max, the kids, and Master get on the train and ride the train out along with the prisoner who's kind of the one driving the train.
Pig killer. Yeah.
All right, and there's this just track coming out of the town, and I was like, I feel like they should have really emphasized and set this up earlier on, that there's a train with a train track that they can use.
Yeah, it goes back to the thing in Road Warrior where when he came into the town that had the like oil drill and all that, we got very specific layouts, not only of the geography, but like everything they had available in terms of defense and offense. We got the whole gist of the area. This one, yeah, it just feels like it wasn't quite as well explained, where they can just introduce a train line, and that's not an easy feat. Like, this is still post-apocalypse. To have a train that's just been buried down here the whole time feels like a big deal that should have been covered in the first act.
Yeah, it feels like there should be a reason why someone's even went to the effort of making sure it still works. Like, maybe Master makes sure this still works because he sees this as his escape, like, button,
yeah,
right? This is his safety thing. Like, but it's something just to set it up because it is such a specific thing. It's not as quite the same level as like the kids kind of showing up out of nowhere, like almost in the previous chunk of the movie. But I still kind of felt that same feeling again, where I'm like, oh, there's a train track all of a sudden. That feels out of nowhere.
Yeah.
So you know, it's one of those little disconnects that you get sometimes with these things. That said, though, once we're on the train track and then all the villains are chasing after them, you know, Tina Turner reassures her town, hey, we're going to get Master back. Don't worry, we'll rebuild. And anyone who took him, we'll kill them for daring to take our scientist man.
Yeah, but again, I think that's good characterization, because wanting to maintain your society is not an inherently evil thing. Like, these people all rely on the methane systems to work in order to live. So her saying we're going to go get the guy who knows how to run that stuff back is just looking out for her people. It's not an inherently evil task. It's
but hold on now. The way she's treating him and making sure that she can control him is evil. It is villainous. So I have no sympathy for her character at this point.
No, I'm not saying sympathy, but I am saying that all of the different factions here have this moral grayness to them, where Master Blaster, he was obviously a prick, but now he's being abused. So there isn't exactly sympathy there, but there is like, you can see where he's coming from a perspective. Same thing with Tina Turner. Same thing with the tribe people who wanted to leave. Like, they were promised this whole thing in their, essentially their religion, that this guy would show up and he would lead them back to the promised land, basically. But that didn't end up happening, so they got anxious about it and left. Everyone has their reasons, but nobody is definitively in the right. And I really like that about the story here.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, Master, his real comeuppance for how much of a prick he is at the start of the movie is kind of the death of Blaster. I think that's kind of like, he's kind of made that bed. Like, the idea that the others are colluding against him like this to take his friend out of the picture is kind of like a result of how he's treating them, because they want to take control forcefully and make him a slave to their needs, rather than being some mutual beneficial agreement to work on everything.
You say mutually benefit, but like, there was the point where all it took was him having his ego offended, where he shut off all of the gas to the entire town. That felt more to me like he was in that same level of despot than even Tina Turner was.
No, that's what I'm saying. He was in the wrong at that point. I'm saying that his comeuppance for that, like, the error of his ways was, oh, this led to collusion against him, and then that led to the death of his friend. Like, he made his bed by the way he was acting, and that's what that resulted in.
I see what you're saying. I just don't feel like it was enough. I don't feel like he got enough comeuppance against him there.
Sure, yeah, but that's just a matter of opinion. Like, he's like, you can say that's enough or not. I'm saying that that's how this is functioning as a storytelling mechanic. He gets his comeuppance in that sense, which means that he's more sympathetic to the audience, because him caring about Blaster like a son or whatever makes him feel more human. All of a sudden, he's not just this prick who's threatened to shut off the energy. He's a human being who cares about someone, and you can kind of maybe start to understand a little bit. And then the way he's treated afterwards, you're like, okay, clearly Tina Turner is being villainous, and is she this way because of how Master Blaster was treating her, or was she always this way, and it was always kind of this game of like I mean, arguably you could say that she was always this way, and Master Blaster got worse in the first place because he had to kind of battle her on her own terms, right? This idea that if he did just let her have more control, he would lose too much control, and it would the dominoes would fall that way. I mean, that's just kind of speculation based on what little we do see.
Yeah,
in the
I mean,
movie.
it makes sense.
But I think that's interesting, because ultimately, once we get out into this final big set piece section of the movie, where Max is on the train with the kids and with the prisoner. What I thought was interesting about this, with all the others chasing after them in their various buggies and cars and whatnot, one of which was oddly coated in cow print. That was an interesting...
Look, man, you gotta have style here in the Outback. If you can take cow, you take cowhide.
It made me think of Wacky Races. I don't know if you ever watched Wacky Races growing up. Yeah. It made me think of like one of their themed cars. But anyway...
Yeah, I can see it. I think it was more so because that's the one that Max immediately hijacks, so it's a visual cue of like, it stands out against all this other just kind of metal gritwork things.
You know which one's him, because he's in the gimmicky one. Yeah.
Right.
But I think what I liked about this, to separate it from the previous two, because the first movie is very different in that it's more traditional cars on roads because society's still kind of functioning. The second movie, we had the gimmick of the big oil tanker and all the vehicles around it. This felt like an evolution to that to me, where the train is on a track, so they're kind of an easy target, and because they can't turn. They can't just turn and try and evade. They can't hide somewhere else. The people chasing them know exactly where to go to find them, because all they have to do is follow the track. So it makes them more vulnerable in a way that I thought added a little bit of stakes to them almost being sitting ducks on this train, because they can't really do anything to disguise where they are or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that the oil tanker was in the same kind of situation. Like, there was, as long as they were on that long single stretch of road, there was nothing they could really do to fight back, except for what they brought with them in terms of like gunnery on top. But yeah, no, this is far more of a thing of like, look, you could easily cut them off if you just go far enough down the track. Like, it's not going to be something that you like, there could be a turn off at some point.
Well, that's why I said it's an evolution, because I definitely recognize that the tanker obviously had a lot of similarities in that sense, but this is more definitive. No, they're on a track. There is nothing. They can't just go off road. With this.
But that being said, I really like that they took advantage of the fact it was a train as well, because there's actually 2 cars to this train. There's like the engine up front, and then there's the secondary car, and they do the bit where in order to escape the bad guys, the pin ends up getting pulled that's keeping them together, so the engine separates its way out from the rest of the train.
Tina Turner grabs Master and has a hold of him, but luckily Max is on like above her and just lifts him up and then jumps over to the front car to get away from him. That's quite late on in this set piece, though. There's a whole lot of stuff with the vehicles, trying to ram into them, flipping. There's a great bit where Iron Bars, who's dirty as shit because he fell in the pig shit, like his vehicle explodes in front of the train, but it turns out he's not dead. He's actually just sort of like comically pressed up against the front of the train grill.
I was wondering how you would feel about that, because that's the most it feels like it gets pure cartoon in this movie.
It's very cartoony. Like, I have to admit, the reveal that he was there was funny. Like, I did kind of chuckle at it. And maybe the movie at least set me up for this is a bit more lighthearted, so we can do something like that without it feeling like we're completely... But if they'd done that at the start of the movie, it probably would have bothered me more, because I'd be like, wait a minute, this is so cartoony. But it's almost like they sort of gradually... Like, now this is a bit more lighthearted, and they kept doing more silly. By the time you get to the kids, and like I say, they kind of made me think of Ewoks a little bit. Because that's the thing. I like the conceptually what the kids are in terms of what they represent in the world building, like you said. But they're also, they do change the tone of the movie quite a bit. And there's a lot of like Max getting, having to deal with the fact that they're being all flighty and jumping around. And
well, they specifically take that record thing that I said earlier. They had a record, and as they're in the back of this train car, they find a record player and they put 2 and 2 together. They're like, oh, this is it.
That's my favorite part of it, is that they see the record player and they look at each other and go, does this look like it? This goes, could this be it? And I love that they put the vinyl on it, and they're like, okay. And he starts talking into his headset. He's like, all right, Alpha, Deco, blah, blah. And then Max just happens to be shimmying in the outside of the train, and he looks out the window and sees them trying to get this record to play. So he just leans in, because he obviously remembers what a record player is. So he just leans in and puts the needle on the thing, hits the button, and it turns out to be like a how to learn French audio
Repeat
tape.
after me. Bonjour. And the kids are like, bonjour. Hello. Hello.
Yeah, that was a nice payoff. Like, this is the thing. Once it gets to the big train set piece, I was mostly just having fun again with everything it was doing.
Yeah,
because it's an entertaining, set of sequences. It's fun. There's stunts, and that's something that's been very good about this movie, or all this whole franchise up until this point. All that stuff was still really, really solid.
I enjoyed it. I don't want to, because at the beginning I said the third act kind of fell apart for me. I didn't dislike the things that were shown. It was only in comparison to how big and bold the set pieces were from the last movie that made it feel like it was such a massive step back. It didn't feel like there was as much action or tension as there was in Road Warrior. But I liked what they did do from its own just viewing the movie individually thing.
Sure. I don't even know if I'd say that 2 is bigger necessarily. I think it depends what way you look at it, because in some ways this does feel bigger. It's definitely a bigger budget, and it's got more... there's more to it in some ways, but I mean, I would agree the stakes were better in 2. Like, there's a reason why 2 is the classic. 2 is the one that everyone remembers, because one of the things that works so well in it is just how much they set up that final chase and why they were doing what they were doing and what the importance of it was. Whereas this sort of comes together in a rush where, like I said, we've not really defined what the goals of a lot of the characters are, other than just escape from the town. Obviously, as it goes on, and when we get to the ending where, like, the plane, so they get to the pilot guy, right? We finally get back to him.
They reach the end of the railroad, and his son is just standing there like, this is a stick up. And then they look and see Tina Turner's crew driving in. He's like, all right, never mind, bye, and just runs off. Yeah,
and he leads them to a ladder that goes down to like a secret area, and that's where the dad is, the pilot. And this is where I got confused, because I thought Max was recognizing from the last movie, if I'm honest.
Same. For a minute there I was, but then their interaction is very clearly not like, oh my God, Max, you're still alive? What?
Yeah, it's very strange, but He's like, hey, it's your lucky day. You've got a plane, right? He's like, aye. And obviously that was at the start of the movie, so he knows he has a plane in this movie. It's not just a reference to the last movie, if that's what it was. It's a reference to the start of this one. And he's like, okay, take these kids in a plane. And this was something else. Like, again, I'm going to say something and you're probably going to disagree with it, but I thought it was really obvious when the kids said that they had this whole religion effectively based around that the prophecy says they'll get to fly in a plane. I was like, oh, we've got a pilot character. Like, I'm 99% sure they're going to be getting to fly by the end of this movie.
It wasn't obvious to me at that point, but the moment that because I wasn't sure how much the pilot character was even going to come back. Like, he shows up in that opening scene and then he's just gone for like the rest of the movie up until this point. So I thought he might have just been like a little, hey, here's this opening thing just to get Max separated from his stuff, and then we're going to ignore it for the rest of the time. But no, as soon as the kids showed up at the end of the train track, I was like, okay, yeah, we're going to fly. That's what's going to happen now.
It gets... Like, it feels like you almost like talk yourself out of like the obvious dramatic thing they're going to do, because they've set up A, they've set up B, so obviously C has to happen. And that's what that felt like to me, is like, okay, you've established as a character who flies things, you've given me these kids who have dreamed of flying on a plane. So, like, they're going to get the miracle, because in the Wasteland it's a miracle that they'll ever get to experience that. And sure enough, we run into this pilot and they try and fly the plane, but they can't take off, right? They go try as hard as they can, but they just can't quite take off. They're having to dump all the extra stuff that's on the plane, and they get to that cliff effectively in the desert. It's like, shit, we have to turn back, and Tina Turner and her, like, you know, army of vehicles are coming towards us, and the pilot's like, hey, that's not enough, like, that's not enough space before we get to them. There's not enough room to take off. And Max says there will be. And I actually really like this plot beat, which is that Max makes the choice to not get in the plane with everyone else. He instead grabs a vehicle. I assume it's one that the pilot had?
So we kind of blanked out on an entire character here. There's one of these kids who kind of keeps his distance, and he's mute, and he has a whole skull motif going on with him.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, his name is Screw Loose, which, beautiful name there. But he apparently, according to Wikipedia at least, has the ability to like mimic others. Like, he's very good at just picking things up very quickly through watching. And during the fight scene, he managed to hop onto one of Tina Turner's trucks, knocks out the driver, and essentially steals the truck from him. And he arrives here as the plane is reaching this cliff edge, and he's like, hey guys, I have a truck. I mean, he's mute, so he just stands around, but that's the gist of it.
He says hello. Actually, his makeup is very reminiscent of some makeup that's in the next movie, actually. I was really noticing that. Because he's got like black circles over his eyes kind of thing, and like sort of pale white on the rest of his face.
Is he a Morton Joe? Is that him?
But no, because you've got this whole hero of the wasteland thing where Max makes this selfless act to ram this vehicle into the middle of these vehicles that are coming towards the plane to create a bit of extra runway, which gives the plane just enough room to take off. So the end of this movie is the plane taking off and the pilot taking the kids hopefully to somewhere better, right? You get this hopeful idea, and Max has effectively sacrificed himself to stay behind to let them do that. It feels like a purely heroic choice for Max, and obviously they've got the Master to help build whatever society they're going to build. So it's quite a sweet act by Max, and I really like that. And Tina basically is just like, we're just going to leave you here. I'm not even going to bother killing you. You're stuck in the desert.
Yeah. I mean, it's that's the kind of thing that I think makes her so morally gray there. It's like, she could easily just be traditional villain and say, oh, Max, you've ruined all of my plans and we're all going to die. I'm going to kill you for that. But instead, she's just like, it's not even worth it. Like, I was here to pick up the guy. The guy's gone. I have no issue with you. Goodbye. And just leaves him.
Yep. And we actually get a very reminiscent shot of from the end of Road Warrior where the camera pulls back from Max as he's standing there in the desert. It's very reminiscent to that final shot of Road Warrior where he's standing in the road and the camera pulls back. But that's not the final shot though, because we get a little bit of like an epilogue. It's basically the girl, Savannah, starts narrating from the future, which is very reminiscent again of the kid from 2 narrating from the future. But we find that the pilot eventually got them to a city. Now the city, of course, is still a wasteland. It's still clearly,
it's Sydney.
Yeah. But they get to the city and they live there. They choose to live there, and they've got, obviously the engineer, the Master has engineered their a system for so they have lights and stuff like that. And we see that when she's telling this story, time has passed and she now has a kid, and some of the other kids are older as well. They're adults now, they have kids, and she's telling this story just like she did in the middle of the movie, where every day they tell the telling of what happened, but now it includes this part of how this road warrior, this lone hero, found them and helped them get to where they are now, and that they keep the lights on every night in the city where they live in the hopes that him or someone else who needs a new home will see the lights in the distance and find them in the city. So it's got this hopeful thing. It feels like, again, like an evolution of how 2 ended, with, again, one of the kids growing up to the future, and like, hey, there was this mysterious hero that was only there for a brief bit of time, but kind of saved our lives and gave us a better future.
It's this weird thing where all of these oral traditions, they are coming from people who Max not only helped save individually, but like helped develop their society more or less. They went off and they able to grow a entire civilization wherever they went. So I really like this idea that by the end of Max's story, obviously it's a never-ending tale, but by the end of his life, essentially this idea of Max is someone who essentially saved the world after the apocalypse. He's someone who brought all these people back from the brink and formed this new, not utopia, but like this new era of mankind forward.
Yeah, it's there's a lot of heart in it, which, you know, that's the one thing that I don't think feels like a betrayal of like the tone shift to this movie. It feels like this should have been here anyway. It's more, you know, it's more just how it does other things in the movie that feels like the tone shifted to a more lighthearted affair. But yeah, no, I think I do actually kind of like the ending. So, you know, there's enough good stuff in here that it's not like a disaster of a movie by any means. It's got a lot of interesting sequences and world building, some characters that kind of stick out and are memorable. It's got cool set design and costuming and all the stuff that you kind of expect from it. But yeah, it's not as grimy. It does feel like the tone is a little bit more lighthearted. And I think, but for me, the bigger issue is probably, like I say, it feels like such a drastic shift when you get to the middle section of the movie with the kids, and then the lack of like super motivation to go back to the town. It doesn't feel like Max isn't invested in anything until the very end, which would be fine, except it doesn't really feel like some of the others are invested in that much either. It kind of feels like we get into the third act just because enough different people all make simple little decisions separately, as opposed to there's a real character with a driving force who really believes in something, kind of thing. So I would have liked a bit more there, but I don't think it was a bad time. I'm not mad at it. I don't think it's a bad movie. I think it's the weakest of the three, probably.
Yeah, I mean, that's as far as I think of it as. Like, it is still a well-made movie. I think, again, there is some pacing issues in there, and the transition between first to second act was just non-existent. But I think that the quality of the movie is fine on its own. I think it's only when you compare it to things like Road Warrior, when you look back at that, you feel this dip in, like, I don't want to... It's strange to say, like, the core audience of it, but, like, again, there's this idea as to what, you know, the wasteland was and how brutal it was, and it feels like it was just significantly toned back. And I don't think that that's a betrayal or anything, but I do think that it's the Ewok problem of, like, you have this world and then you're kind of just making it a bit more family friendly, where that kind of goes against what the world was defined as, you know?
I think an interesting comparison is less, because Road Warrior is obviously the best one. I think an interesting comparison is this versus the original, because I think this is more of a post-apocalyptic. I'll say that again. This is more of a post-apocalyptic movie, and I think a lot of those elements in here do stand out as being, I like a lot of this more than the first movie in a ways. But I think the first movie is more confidently directed and paced. Like, it feels like a tighter film in a lot of ways.
But they both have their issues. I think the first one is much more of like the indie film. It feels like someone had a vision, a story they really wanted to tell. This one feels like it has more of a budget and more star power behind it, but it feels like it is less tightly written. It feels like it is more of just Hollywood by the numbers sort of thing. In
a way, though, I would say this one feels a lot more like Mad Max, bizarrely.
Oh, yeah, For sure. That first one, because that's the issue, is the first one had no wasteland.
Yeah.
It still was in towns and stuff. This one still at least has the setting right of what we expect from Mad Max.
Yeah, which is not a problem for the first movie. It's only a hindsight thing, but
right.
There's this weird thing where this kind of feels more like what you'd expect a Mad Max movie to be like, albeit with the tone being such a shift from the first two. So it's an interesting one. I think I can see why it turns some people off when if they were big fans of the first two, which is I get it, but like I think, since this movie's came out in 1985, like our entire lives, plus some extra, basically. Yeah. There's been so many worse examples of bad sequels or third or fourth movies or things that have completely just betrayed what something is. I still think this has enough in it where it's still a very interesting watch and entertaining watch. When I rewatch this franchise, I won't skip this. This is still a perfectly solid watchable movie.
Yeah, that's like, it's one of those things where if there's a box set or some deal or something where it's selling the first three movies, I don't feel like this is one where people are getting this as a consolation. People are getting this just because it's part of the box. This is something where you get all three because it tells the full story and it is a interesting watch from beginning to end.
For sure. And they do. I mean, all three movies are different in their own ways, which is also nice in a sense. Like there's a charm to that and a quality to that I think does work. And even though we're talking about this like it's the last one, and in a way it was for a long time, it was the last one. Obviously, Fury Road came out so much later, and it was kind of this relaunch of the idea, and it worked with a new actor in the role because, like we've been saying, Max is kind of a folklore hero of the post-apocalyptic wasteland. That's kind of what he has become. So you can, much like a James Bond, you could just keep doing it forever with a new actor every so often doing a few more movies. I mean, will we ever get another Tom Hardy Mad Max movie? I don't know. There was plans for one, but they chose to do Furiosa instead. So we'll see if we ever get, Mad Max The Wasteland, I think is what it was meant to be called.
Okay.
We'll see if that happens.
I mean, I'm not, like you said, I'm not opposed to I haven't seen Tom Hardy yet. I have not done Fury Road, but it is okay with it being a recurring character like James Bond or completely changing out the role like James Bond. You can just make it either way and it'll work out from the context of what Mad Max is.
Yeah, it's interesting. So
that being said, I do hope that they still continue to recycle roles where they can, or recycle actors, I should say, because it just adds that extra little bit to it of these characters keep filling in these same kind of roles as the story progresses on and on.
I think that's harder when there's big time jumps between the productions, because you have actors getting much older or passing away, and even if you do want to bring an actor back from, say, this one and a new one, it's like, okay, it's fine, you can bring them back, that's cool, but they can't really be the same type of character again because they have to be an old person now. Versus, I
mean, you say that, but isn't that from the little I know about Fury Road, isn't that Immortan Joe was like the villain from the first one?
Yeah, no, true. But it's a very different villain.
Oh yeah, no, I'm sure.
Very different villain.
Just that same sort of thing of you have the devil character, the villain character. So I'm interested to see if they could continue with that, even if they bring back, Charlize Theron as just another femme fatale kind of character.
I don't think they would do that. I think they would expect that the mainstream audience would just be kind of annoyed by that or confused by it.
Maybe.
So I don't. I
mean, we were confused by the gyrocopter, so that's fair.
Yeah, I think they would probably steer away from that. I think you get away with the villain because it had been so long, and he's also wearing a mask in Fury Road. So
hear me out though. Mad Max Multiverse.
Oh God. No, please never. Yeah. So yeah, I think Beyond Thunderdome is a perfectly watchable, fun movie, albeit not without its flaws, and certainly the act shifts are pretty wild to the first one, like you said, is basically there's no transition almost. It just kind of Max is in a different location and a completely new character just wanders into frame and takes him off to the second act. And then the act 2 to act 3 transition is not even that much better, to be honest. It's a little better, but it's not much better.
There's a point when, the airplane guy comes in, steals Max's caravan, and then he's forced to walk through the desert. You could cut it right there, right before he finds the whistle in the boots, and then just cut to him being found by Savannah, totally would work. Like, that is still a perfectly valid order of things to happen.
So, all right, I guess we're ready to rate Beyond Thunderdome. What are you giving it, David?
I could beat around the bush, but I'm not. I'm just going to give it a 7.5. I think it is better than the first movie. I think I enjoyed it more than the first movie. Not quite as tight, but more so of, like you said, what I think of Mad Max. It's in this sort of setting. I personally, as much as I think that each of the acts kind of stands on its own, not that it could stand on its own, but like in the movie they do without any sort of lead in or anything, I think that I still find the second act to be the most interesting in terms of like world building and lore stuff. While it does feel weird that Max is in the wasteland with a bunch of kids, that's like, if they had just taken that center plot and expanded it to the whole movie, I think there could have been something really cool there.
Do you know what's so funny about that statement is I kind of agree that it's interesting from a world building perspective, but I think from a watching the movie perspective, it's the most badly paced part of the movie. Right,
yeah. But that's what I'm saying. If they just took that and made it its own thing, then like fixed the pacing there, I think that would have been the more interesting plot than Bartertown was. For me, at least.
Yeah. You need action, though, and I don't know what action you get if you just make a whole movie about Max running into a bunch of kids, you know?
I mean, you make it Lord of the Flies. Eventually, one of the kids starts killing people. It's all good.
So I don't know where you go with that. I mean, it's kind of a weird thing to think about, is that I like the ideas behind that middle section, but it does just feel like the pacing just completely grinds to a halt, and I'm just kind of waiting for, like, okay, when are we picking up with the actual main threat and why we're going to get back to the main threat? Like, these feel like questions that just were lingering in my head the whole time. So yeah, for me, I was actually just checking what I gave the first one, because I couldn't remember, and I think I gave it a 6.5 for the record, for people who don't remember, and you know, obviously to me that's like just almost good, right? Just shy of it for whatever reason, and I'm sure I talked about that at the end of that review. I think, because I'm really questioning, do I want to say this is better than the first one? Because I think it's a really interesting debate as to whether this is better than the first one, because they're both very, very different, and they have their own faults. I think ultimately, I probably do lean towards this one. I think I'm going to give this a 7. And it's just a nudge up from that first one. I think the first one's a better made movie from a pure technical level, like the car chases and all that kind of stuff. But I think this one's better from a character perspective, even though some of the side characters do feel like they just kind of pivot. But just something as simple as Master Blaster looks cool, Tina Turner's memorable, the world building with the kids, but most importantly, Max making that heroic choice at the end to save them. In a lot of ways, feels like the most heroic choice he's made in the entire franchise up until this point. In some ways,
yeah, I get that.
So I'll go with a 7. So I guess we're actually rating it slightly above the first one. I think people who grew up in the 80s might have a problem with that and might think that that's a crazy thing to say that this is better than the first.
Yeah, well, I mean, isn't that the whole debate with, like, the younger generation remembers Ewoks fondly because it's the kind of thing that they grew up with? Isn't that kind of thing going on?
I mean, I don't, but sure.
Yeah, generation as a whole, not the individual.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess. It's interesting, because I think, to me, the reason why this doesn't annoy me as much, I think, is because I've seen a lot of other sequels over the years do much, much weirder turns and much, much worse sort of continuations than this is. And it's the same thing I feel whenever anyone really talks about how much they hate RoboCop 3, for example, which is not a great movie. I'm never going to say it is. But, like, I still find that quite watchable versus, like, I don't know, like Species 3, which is just garbage. From like start, at least RoboCop 3's got some interesting ideas in it. Anyway, we've not done RoboCop shit. That'll be coming at some point.
No, I've only ever seen the first one, and that was like a decade ago, so I could use a refresher.
I'm looking forward to doing those at some point. But in fact, we might be starting those later this year.
What, Peter? Spoilers.
Look, we've got an 80s countdown planned. We have to do RoboCop 1 before the 80s countdown. Okay, it's important.
All right.
So,
All right.
anywho, yeah, I give it a 7. You give it a 7.5. So before David gets to his homework, I'll just tell you about all the bonus stuff you can get over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. Every month, patrons get access to the Criterion Cut, which is a review show me and David do, just like this one, but we do movies from the Criterion Collection. And then at the $5 and up tiers, you get access to extra reels, which is the opposite of that. Me and David review some of the worst things ever made, and it gets delirious and wacky and stuff. It's kind of...
Last time I nearly got caffeine poisoning, so tune in for that.
That is true. David decided to down repeated cans of Coke throughout the episode as a bit because it related to the movie and almost killed his insides as a result.
I will live and die for the bit. Don't ever question that.
So you can get that stuff over at Patreon. Obviously, there's also bonuses for Screams After Midnight, the horror movie podcast that I do with Tim. That's the third movie show on Mail Fuzz Movies. So if you like this in Collector's Cut, worth trying that too. And if you don't know what Collector's Cut is, it's the show that me and David do in addition to this, where we go through franchises and we go through like seasons. We just did a 70s disaster season, for example, and right now we're working through the Ghostbusters movies. So, fun to be had.
All these shows, I see Pete more than I see my own family.
I'm better than your family, so that's okay.
Oh, I'm not sure if I told them about this show. I told them about Collector's Cut. So.
Hey, David's family, if you're watching, I'm better than you.
Oof.
Especially you, Auntie Ethel.
Oh, come on. Don't bring Ethel into this. She has a bad hip.
That's nature's way of saying it's time for her to fall.
Jesus.
Down the stairs.
Got dark here at the end. Anyway, did I have homework?
You did.
I talk about that?
So yeah, it's David's homework. He goes back and watches a sci-fi movie that we did on the show before he joined it. So this was something from the first 215 episodes. Usually a first-time watch. Sometimes it'll be a refresher of an old thing that you've seen a long time ago. But what was your homework movie this week, David?
Well, Pete, I was watching this and I thought, boy, I really love that bit with like the kids finding religion. And I also really like that it's the third one in a franchise. I did Alien 3, which, to be fair, should not be a surprise because I did the other Alien movies with the other Mad Max films. I'm keeping that up. So, just to be clear, I did not do the assembly cut. I did the theatrical cut. And that was solely because I could not be asked to go find the assembly cut.
Fair enough.
That being said, your original review with Tara was with the assembly cut, so I'm kind of doing like a different thing here. But it just felt mean.
It's
I think that's
movie,
the best way. It just like going into it, it just immediately hits you in the face with like, you like the other Alien movies, screw you, and then just continue that sort of feeling the whole way through.
Here's a question, actually. Since you listened to the review that we did talking about the other cut.
Yes.
What did you think? I mean, obviously didn't see them, but just from hearing what the additions or differences were, what did they sound like to you?
I mean, it sounded like it was a more cohesive movie, but it didn't remove the problems that I ultimately had with it.
Oh, it's still mean. It's still a mean-ass movie. Yeah, that's
it
not
was
changed.
mean. And the other thing, and Tara specifically pointed this out, was that they used a very, very early version of CGI for the alien here.
Yes.
And something about the coloring was just wrong the entire time. And I don't know why they didn't fix that in any sort of re-release, because it's just not good.
Because they shouldn't. It should stand as it was when it was released. You hear me, George Lucas? It should stand as it was when it was released.
I agree, but I also think that like genuine errors are okay to fix. I think that that's one of the few things, as long as it isn't like an error that the community loves.
But that's but is bad CG an error? Like, I get saying, we can finally remove that wire that shows like how the actor has been held up. I can understand maybe fixing that, but when you're saying the CG looks bad, we should fix it. But I don't know, that's like changing the effect to a new effect.
I agree.
It's a slippery slope. That's all I'm saying.
I don't want the CGI to be changed. Keep the same model, keep the same motion, but like change the tint so that it at least fits with the scene. That's all I'm asking for.
Okay, I can live with that. I can live with that.
Yeah.
Okay.
In terms of positives, I think that it does an interesting idea of the first movie is its own, like, you know, it's just a horror movie set in space, whatnot. The second movie deals with the ideas of motherhood and like birth and stuff. This movie does a whole lot with the idea of religion and sacrifice and redemption and stuff like that. And there's a really cool idea at the core of that. But I think that by the time you hit the third act, it kind of just falls apart under all of the stuff that came before it. There just wasn't enough to really keep it going for even a shortened runtime. It was only like an hour and 30 something minutes. And by the time we hit the third act, I was like, all right, I'm sick of these chase scenes throughout this facility that I have no idea. It feels like it's 10 square miles or something like that. It doesn't feel like I'm trapped with the monster. I could easily miss it at any given point.
There's no sense of geography because all the hallways look the same. But I will say visually the movie looks good because Fincher knows how to make a good looking movie. One of my favorite things that gets added in the longer cut, it's a really quick thing, but you actually see them find Ripley outside, and there's like a great shot of like Charles Dance like running across the horizon carrying her, and there's all these big oil rig looking things in the back. It's really atmospheric, and I'm like, oh man, like give me another movie in this setting. Like I'll probably dig it. I'll probably enjoy it, but it's an interesting movie. It's a flawed movie. I usually get something out of watching it, even though it's clearly like a slap in the face after the previous one. So
yeah, but overall, since I was watching a different cut than you, my rating's probably not going to really matter all that much, but I will give it a 5.5. It's above the middle mark. It's okay, but there is just a lot that by the time the end of the movie hit, I was like, I'm glad that's done. I'm glad I don't have to continue that. I
guess I gave it like a 6, if I was to guess.
Yeah, you gave it a 6.
Yeah, sounds right. Okay. Well, I look forward to David's Alien Resurrection review at the end of Mad Max Fury Road.
We can't. Because that's coming out after Alien Day.
Oh, so you'll have to fit that in somewhere else. Okay, fair enough.
I'm going to surprise you. It's going to be somewhere else.
The reason why he has to fit that in somewhere else is because for Alien Day, we'll be doing Prometheus. And then, obviously, because there's a new Alien movie coming out later this year, we'll also be doing Alien Covenant sometime in the summer. So look forward to the rest of the Alien franchise this year. I love that Tara got to do the original 4, and then you have to come in and do the 2 prequels.
Great.
That's so good for you.
Well, maybe the new one will be just as much a classic as the first 2, and I'll get to have that under my belt.
I hope so. I would like nothing more than that, David. Absolutely nothing more. I want a good Alien movie, goddammit. I want to see an Alien movie in the theater and be happy I saw it. Like, I want that experience because I've never had that.
Dream. Yep.
You know, it's been nothing but misery. And same with Predator. I got a good Predator movie, but it wasn't in theaters.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Bastards.
I'm sure. Yeah, just do that rent out a theater thing. Just like take one seat, one showing, and just show it for yourself.
Anywho, there you go. So that's your homework. Another Alien movie in the books. So yeah, that's been the Atomic Cinema Experiment, everyone. We've been talking about Mad Max 3. Let us know what you think of the movie in the comments. Always helps us out as well. If you hit the like button, that's good. And then go to Patreon, like we said. But that is the show. Thank you very much for joining us. And next week, I usually tell you that before we wrap up, so I'll do that too. Next week, if all goes to plan, because we're recording this a little bit in advance, but in theory, next week should be Dune Part 2.
Oh boy. Can't wait to finally see how that wraps up.
I say that because a lot of the new releases have recently been shuffled around, so we could get to like the week before that, and then they'll delay it by a month and screw up our plans. But
I'm going to assume Dune is not being released by Sony, and therefore I won't have to worry about that level of dickery. But we'll see.
No, I want to say that's Warner Brothers. I could be wrong.
I think so. Yeah. Sounds right. Because it's on Max, so yeah, that'd be Warner Brothers.
Oh yeah, Max. Great. Alright, that's the show, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. We always appreciate it. Keep watching science fiction and computer at Salsa.